that type of thing is part of the reason you overpaid for Nick Foligno.
Exactly.
It's why you gave him $4 million and Corey Perry when everybody else saw that and go, what are they doing? I guess they just got to reach the cap floor. No, you're paying for more than just the production on the ice, and both guys have been very effective on the ice as well. But you pay. Foligno's a guy. He's like having another coach out there, but not. He's a guy that the younger guys are probably going to open up to a little more because he's a player. He's not. He's not one of the coaches. He's not. You don't want to worry about. I think some young guys may be a little. Gun shy to maybe not criticize a coach but question or so Foligno could be that that middleman there, but Foligno's a guy that keeps things loose. We see him in practice all the time. Mm-hmm. He's always laughing. He's always talking to guys, but then he's like the team dad.
Yeah,
and it's like when your dad says, hey, pull your head out of your ass, you listen.
Yeah.
So
here's what Foligno had to say about the quote from Vlasic. He said, they weren't supposed to let you guys know about that speech. In all seriousness, I just told them that we have a good team here. The past stays in the past. Let's have a winning trip by the time we get home. We should have pride when we go on the ice. And this is something that Foligno's been saying all year. The first time he spoke, the second time he spoke, he said, this team is not bad. This team's going to surprise some people. It's going to turn some heads. And I think we all kind of agree, that win in Toronto was impressive. The win in Pittsburgh was impressive. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to Carm before the show. It's like we're programmed because of the last few years of last year's Hawks roster and the years before Jeremy Colliton of just I don't care what the score is, they're going to lose. Somehow they're going to find a way to blow this game, to lose this game, and they haven't. And I think part of that is the coaching. Part of it is just a better roster. But you've got guys out there that are like, hey, let's go. Believe in this. And I don't want this to become a Kane and Toews were bad leaders thing. But the way they were more Toews than Kane, let's be honest. The way that Toews was behaving the last few years here, upset about the direction. Understandably so. He's a huge competitor. He's used to winning. But he was surly. He was pissed. He was unhappy in the locker room. That had an effect. Now you bring in Foligno. You bring in Perry. Foligno, who is just this constant optimist, happy to be here. Has been on good teams. Has been on bad teams. He's been through the gauntlet. It's a different kind of leadership. And I think that's... And remember, when we talked to Alex Vlasic after last season... Or was it 2 seasons ago? We talked to Vlasic. Whatever it was.
When he said about the eggshells?
The eggshells,
last season.
That was, or was that the beginning?
That was beginning of
this training camp.
That was beginning of last season.
Yeah, and he said, it was like walking on eggshells in that locker room, and now it's a different feel. And he goes on. This is also from last night. Vlasic talking about Corey Perry. It's cool to have a player like that, not only for his experience, but the fact that he's been to the final and he's won a Stanley Cup. It's cool to have a guy like that and a guy like Foligno in the locker room mentoring the young guys. They're super vocal and super helpful for everybody. Yeah, that is exactly what Kyle Davidson wanted when he brought these two guys in. Oh, and by the way, Corey Perry's a point-per-game player at 38 years old.
Sure, of course,
which I'm sure will last.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's
leading the team in points.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the pace that'll last. Look, I think the difference between last year's locker room and this year's locker room is that it was very clear that the plan was most of the guys that were brought in, or they were the high-ticket players like Toews and Kane that were still on the roster, most of them were supposed to be traded at the deadline. Toews, obviously, his health led him away from that, but if he was healthy all season, I think that maybe a trade happens. Patrick Kane obviously was moved. Max Domi was moved. Domi and Athanasiou were guys that were brought in. Domi got moved. Athanasiou ended up sticking around, which worked out for him. But the error was these guys are all moving on. And a lot of it, I don't know how much of, you can really get behind some of the players where, it's not as spoken, but it's kind of, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Like, yeah, we're probably only here 50, 60 games. Perry and Foligno, I know they're 1-year deals, but they have a heavy price tag. And I don't know if the Blackhawks are looking to move either of those guys. And I don't know if they could, because you're thinking that if they're going to retain salary, like we talked about a couple shows ago, they have 2 slots. You're not going to use both of them on Perry and Foligno to knock down their $4 million cap hits. So I found it interesting that earlier this week, Pierre LeBrun posted in The Athletic his little sit-down interview with Kyle Davidson, and he asked them about the trade deadline and about guys like Perry and Foligno. And Davidson said, quote, "My thought on that is that we signed them to be Blackhawks. We didn't sign them to move them along. We targeted them and brought them in because we saw the value in them for us, and that's the sole focus." And so I think when you think about Perry and Foligno, they're here. I have no thoughts that now, sure, if they perform really well and a team comes to Kyle Davidson and says, "We're going to give you this boatload of stuff for Corey Perry,"
second or third round pick.
then you think about it. But I don't have any real thoughts about like them moving on. Like I believe that we're going to get, a full season of both those guys here, and that makes a difference between, last year and this year with the big voices in the locker room, because the young guys have somebody that's like, well, I can listen to this guy because he's going to be around as long as I'm around.
Well, and the messaging matters too, because I think that when Perry and Foligno were brought here, Davidson and Richardson told them, "This is why we want you. Mm-hmm. We want you to come here and teach these young players how to be professionals."
For both of them.
Yeah, exactly.
When they
traded for the right to sign them.
He could have just waited 3 days and signed them, but traded for him, saying, "Hey, this is what I think about you."
And we want you here to do this. Whereas with Domi and Athanasiou, like you said, even if Davidson didn't say, "Hey, we want to give you a contract, we want you to help, we're probably going to flip you," he probably did. I would think he probably at least gave them that idea before they signed that very likely we'll move you at the deadline. So naturally, those guys aren't going to like solidify themselves in leadership roles. They know they're here for a short time, and even if the same fate awaits Perry and Foligno, at least they understand the assignment right now is whatever happens at the deadline, fine. Right now, our job is to lead this team. Whereas Max Domi signed with the Hawks to bet on himself and say, "Look, I need to have a good season here, put up a bunch of points so I can make more money in free agency." Ended up with another 1-year deal in Toronto. We'll see what it means for him long term, but he put up the big numbers. He was their best player for most of the season. So it's just a different feel around them. Even if ultimately they're all dealt at the deadline, the job description for Domi and Athanasiou last year is different from Foligno and Perry this year.
We all silly like the mayor.